Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hey, Susan.
Hey, hey Guthrie, how are you today?
Well, it is very gray and rainy here,
Yeah, it is where I am too.
so we're trying to
Burst through that.
burst through
Okay,
that.
pretend the sun is shining.
So we have this is a better show. We have multiple segments to this show. We
Yes, we
hope
do.
we hope to have a guest on at some point during
We're
the
waiting
show.
for our guest to join us.
And while we're doing that, I just wanted to, this is what is it? This is called, they call this the A block, and like a
Oh
reel,
yeah,
like a
yeah, yeah.
reel.
You got
Yeah,
the
that's like a
A block,
thing.
and
A
then
block and
there's
the B
the
block,
B. Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
ad reads.
yeah.
Um, so one of the things that we're going to talk about during this show is, and it corresponds to our guests. Now, we don't do our guest today. We don't do a whole lot of talking about more of the, I don't know, advertising strategy, marketing strategy. There's like a big world out there because UX touches a lot of different, it's little tendrils, it touches a lot of different stuff. Touches the dev teams, it touches the
Yeah, I have no idea where you're going with this little
it
introduction
touches,
of
help
the
me
A
say all the
section.
team business
Yeah, UX,
strategy
business strategy,
strategy.
product management, product
Yeah.
design,
Now,
marketing.
with one of our clients, you were actually working with their marketing team rather closely. You
Yes,
really like their marketing team.
yes.
And one of the things that is so interesting is, especially, let's talk about more like the UX design side of things. We talk a lot
Okay.
about UX research. We all
Yeah,
love UX research, but UX design,
yeah.
um, uh, the you know all the different types of UI,
User interface
user
design.
interface, right? All that stuff really intersects with exactly how you're building a brand and you're marketing that brand, and sort of building a cohesive framework sort of across it all. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, and that's why we had our a guest plan and set up. So my plan is to bring along our guest Margot very shortly. So one of the questions I have for you,
Yeah,
and the first question for you is,
yeah.
how do you strike a balance between like branding, right? So marketing is like, hey, we want it to be this way because we're trying to have a cohesive brand. We're
Yes.
trying to develop a relationship with a customer, and the UX UI part of things, which in some ways is so brand agnostic, right? Because it's like we're just trying to do what's best for the user. So what's the balance? How do those two interact?
Uh, well, yeah. I mean, that's interesting. So, on the one hand, I could say that having a cohesive brand, which includes having a cohesive message, which might include even getting down to the level of, having consistent fonts and typography and color and content voice and all those things. And I think these are the things our guest will be talking about. But you could say that being cohesive and being consistent. I mean, consistency is a basic UX principle, and um, so whether uh, you know being consistent is a UX principle. Now, in what way you're consistent and what that consistency is and looks like, I think that's how you're setting your brand. But being consistent, being cohesive is part of communicating clearly, separate from. So that's it works and dovetails well with trying to establish your brand, but it's also just a principle on its own.
Well, and that's one of the. I mean, that's where these worlds kind of collide, because if you're talking about brands and trust between a customer and a brand, I mean, the marketing teams often just are looking at these things in such different ways. It's just such a different. The terminology is different. The way of looking at things and strategizing about things. It's just so different. um,
Yeah,
because
it's interesting. It is interesting because
there's an aesthetic to it
I've
almost.
worked with a lot of marketing team, marketing departments within an organization. I've worked with marketing agencies, that have been brought in to the same client I'm doing UX work for, and the marketing agencies in charge of the of all the things they're in charge of. And it is an interesting interplay because I think branding and marketing and user experience, they're definitely related. They're not exactly the same thing, but sometimes there are these huge overlaps, and then you get confusion about, so let's say, for example, let's just give an example: content strategy. Like the UX people will say, oh, yeah, we need to be involved in the content strategy. And the marketing people will say, we own the content strategy. And yeah, so
Yeah,
who's
wait, you're going to
responsible?
be involved? You mean we're going to actually write the content, and you guys can?
I don't, I think I'm sure there are lots of UX people who write the content. I'm not saying that's a great idea, but I'm sure that happens in many organizations.
Hold on. How many
What?
UX professionals that you've worked with in the last 5 years
Yeah,
write the content for a medium-sized business?
a lot.
Okay.
So, sometimes all right, let's take for example a website. Just a regular old website in a medium-sized company. Who's writing the content? All over the board. Sometimes every group and every department is responsible for writing their own content, not a UX person, not even a marketing person. Sometimes the marketing department is responsible for all the content and all the copy. Sometimes a UX person is doing it. It's all over the board.
Sometimes the engineering team is writing the copy.
Hopefully not, but sometimes. So it's all over the place. Which, okay, have you looked at websites lately? You can tell it's all over the place, right?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting problem. So, for instance, I was working with a client recently, and in their mind, the marketing, copy was supposed to be for marketing, and um, and yet there were UX implications. There was, because from a UX point of view, we were establishing, based on our research, how much copy there needed to be in order for people to make a choice about what to click on that page, and what kinds of content should be there. I mean, we had UX reasons, user experience reasons, for wanting a certain amount of copy and wanting a certain type of copy. The marketing group had their own reasons why they wanted this kind of content and copy versus that. And then the SEO expert had their own reasons for what they wanted, which was not the same as what marketing wanted and not the same was what UX wanted. We had three different versions for one page about how much content, how it should be written, and so on. What are you going to do with that? You know, what are you going to do with that?
Okay.
So I
So
think these are real world, real problems
so
that
let's
it probably don't get enough attention in my
let's
experience.
bring some more attention to
Okay.
this, and we'll see if we actually how much we talk about this topic. Let's bring in our
Okay.
guest. Uh, we have here.
Hey,
I
there
you know
she is. Hey,
Yeah, I
Margot.
was I was gonna say, we should. I was gonna say, who wants to do the introduction? Do you want to do it, Susan? Do you want to do it? I shouldn't do it.
All right. Well, then that leaves either me or Margot.
Well, you usually do the guests
I
introductions, Susan,
usually
but
do
we
the
could
guest
also let Margot do it herself.
introductions.
Either way.
Okay. Well, we're really happy to have with us Margot. And Margot, I am super embarrassed. You know why? I don't know, because when I've talked to you, I call you Margot, which means I'm not sure whether your last name is pronounced Bloomstein or Bloomstein. Oh, Margot, we are not hearing you. We see you, but we don't hear you. Uh-oh.
Well,
Guthrie, technical difficulty.
we'll continue
Are we
our.
there now? Yay!
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 Okay, fabulous. I feel like this has been like the day of, I don't know if it's Mercury in retrograde or like,
Solar flares. We'll call it
yeah, we'll
solar
blame
flares.
that.
Solar
We're
flares.
gonna blame that rather than Logitech or Yeti or electricity or anything like that right now. Um, Bloomstein or Bloomstein, either way is fine. So
You
that's
don't
fine.
have a preference? I'll just call you Margot.
I think we can, yeah, we're good with that.
So we're really happy to have Margot. And Margot is actually, Guthrie, you know this,
Yeah.
is our first guest since we went to a live video streaming of our podcast. So we've had lots of guests on our audio podcast, but this is the first time we've done it on our video. So welcome, and we're really glad to have you join us. And Margot is the author of a book called Trustworthy. That's a really interesting book. And we were just kind of talking before you joined, Margot. We were talking about all kinds of things, but we were starting to touch on um, branding and trust and cohesiveness and consistency.
Because there's the UX people, which is sort of our background, and they're like, well, we are in charge because we're the ones who should be communicating to the user. And then you have the marketing team, and they're like, no,
Of
we should
course,
be the
we're in
one.
charge.
We're
Yeah,
in charge of communicating to the user.
yeah.
And so I don't know if you have a particular a take on exactly where in an organization, who should be in charge in an organization, or what types of people should be in charge in facilitating that relationship between
Mm.
customer and a company.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a tough question because it's a political question,
Mhm.
and it's a question of control and ownership as well as responsibility. We sometimes forget that part. I would say it isn't marketing, it isn't design or UX. It's the user that's really in charge of or in control of communication. And if that communication is successful, they really hold all of the all of the power in that relationship. And I think that's kind of how then we back into those discussions around, can we really fully design a user's experience when they're bringing so much to it as
Mm.
well. And not to sidestep the question of, well,
Sure.
whose responsibility is it then in the organization? Because I think while the user controls a lot of the success of that communication, everyone in the organization certainly needs to kind of bring a lot to it, to sort of the other side of that rhetorical arena, because we've got what our users bring to it as far as their vocabulary, their expectations, their baggage, their preconceived notions, and the last website that they visited before they came to yours.
Right.
But then there's, well, what are we bringing into that equation, into that arena? And I do think that that is something that is shaped by marketing. In If for many product companies, it's shaped by merchandising and in-store experiences. It's shaped by the user experience team, the folks in product development, looking at kind of the front end of the user experience. It's shaped by folks in service design, but then it's also shaped by the folks in PR. And that's why I think within many organizations, it's important to acknowledge first that this is everyone's responsibility to inform the user's experience and to help bolster the user, help build their sense of trust in the organization. It's everybody's responsibility, but we need to have the direction and the vision set forth by, I like to see it as the CMO, the person that can say, here is our vision for the organization, how we want to contribute to our industry, to what our users, what our audience is experiencing. Here's what we want to do, and now we make good on it through all of those other divisions or teams or verticals.
All right. Now I have a question for you, though.
Well,
Because
but before you ask your question, I'll
you
just
have
say
another
no.
question.
I don't have a question. I just wanted just to clarify because it's I mean we obviously agree with you, and one of the things that we were saying right before in our little intro right before you jumped on was that uh, it is the lack of communication and collaboration between these teams in so many organizations, which is why when you go on a lot of websites, like the copy in one section is totally different than the phrasing in another, and that's totally different than the feeling of the video promo, and like there's all these like different things. There's no we were talking about a sense of cohesiveness, which yes, if there was a sort of a structured something in a CMO to help have everyone be on the same page, you would get that sort of nice, streamlined, consistent experience for the user. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
ties in
Yeah,
perfectly with
otherwise it is a
everything you're
very bifurcated experience maybe between how things look and how they sound. That's kind of the classic case, but yeah, or going between divisions.
Yeah, that's what you see a lot of, right?
Yeah,
Is I'm on this page and then I click on a link from that page to go look at something else, which it's the same company. It maybe even be the same product or a related product, but now I feel like I'm in another world, right?
right.
Which
Right.
yeah, and it's I understand it's really hard, even if you set it up right, which I think in a lot of cases wasn't done. Even if you set it up right, that doesn't mean it stays that way because people are adding and changing and they acquire
or
a
one
new
got written 3 years
product.
ago, and now there's 4 different
Right.
people on the
And
team, so the team's totally different. And
right.
Or
But
you've grown
here's
through acquisition, which isn't
right. A lot
necessarily
oh,
a
happens a
bad
there you
thing.
lot.
go.
That's a
Oh,
big part of it.
we
But
have
I
we
have
have a client who did an acquisition of something, and right, so now it's like they just kind of glommed the
the new
whole like the
product set.
previous website onto the old website.
Right, right.
All right.
And
And now
glomming on is no way to proceed with strategy.
wait a minute. The GLOM strategy is not a real
That's
thing
what
with
Margot, that's what your
GLOM.
book is about, right? The
The
glom
GLOM
strategy.
strategy. Yeah,
Glomming your way to
and
success.
GLOM would
Yeah.
have to stand for something. We should think about what GLOM stands for. No, but here's a question though that I have. Here's what I see a lot of, and I'm curious, Margot, if you see this in your work and what you do about it. So I see a lot of really well-meaning people. Okay, so
Mhm.
I I'm not talking about I'm not talking about people or organizations or people in organizations. They're not saying, "Oh, hey, let's um let's just create content and messaging that's bad, right?
No.
That is confusing, that's not cohesive, that the users won't understand." I mean, nobody's doing that. But sometimes in their quest to portray the brand clearly, to just portray the brand and everything around that, they there is my view of it is it's almost like unconsciously they're saying, um, we know what's best. We know what we want. We know here's our vision of what the brand is. And we're going to communicate that in the way we believe is best,
Mhm.
often not with a lot of research behind whether that's working or not. And the users, the visitors, the customers, they're just they're just going to get it. It'll be clear as can be because we have done it so well,
Mhm.
or they have to get it. They we'll just we're forcing it onto them and they will get it. It reminds me of years ago, I gave a workshop to uh, museum directors of small museums in Europe. Now, I know
Mhm.
this sounds like a tangent, and it kind of is, but I'll bring it back.
Very, very niche.
Very niche workshop. It was a lot of fun. It was really different, and it was all about behavioral science and the user experience design of physical spaces, right? The
Mhm.
museum. And we were talking about, at one point in the workshop, we were talking about the fact that people get tired going through a museum exhibit. It's
Sure.
like mentally and physically, it can be tiring, and one picture after another, after another, after another. And, what could be done to make that a better experience? And this one guy, he pounded his fist on the table and stood up and said, "It is." He did it with a European accent. I won't try and show you what that's like, but it is
There's a lot of
our
emotion, it sounds like.
job. It is our job to educate them and to make them want to be there for a long time and make them able to experience the art over a 3-hour period. It's like this idea that, it's too long and people can't do it. He was saying, no, they have to
Mm.
do it. And we are going to, we're going to force them to have a 3-hour experience, whether they like it or not, because it's good for them. And that's our job. And sometimes I feel with this marketing, branding, communication, it's almost like they are going to accept our way of communicating the brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
I mean,
does.
that idea that,
I
like,
don't even want to do research and find out that it
Mhm.
doesn't work, because they just will.
Right, right. And I'm sure he had a lot of success with that approach too. I'm just thinking that the
Yeah, I
idea
should
of
see
telling
how that
someone,
museum's doing, right?
like,
Hey, if you have a monopoly if you have like all the Van Goghs, in your museum, I guess you get to do what you want.
I've been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and I know you're saying like talking museums about this is kind of niche, but I use it as a reference point for a lot of my work. I'm a big fan of looking at exhibit design to better understand how we can manage content and manage other elements in the designed experience to bring people through new information, to educate them with a degree of entertainment and enthusiasm around that education. So I think that we can learn a lot from that. But I will
Mm.
say the idea of forcing your audience, of saying, you will like this. This will be an engaging 3-hour experience and you will love it. My head just goes to the last time anyone said, like, this will be a wonderful 3-hour experience. You will love it. That's how we got Gilligan's Island. Like, that results in a shipwreck, and it's not great. It's entertaining, but it's not great. But I do think that idea of saying we know best, we confuse that with saying we know ourselves, because I do trust most organizations to be able to articulate their vision, their own goals, their communication goals. Sometimes that requires some facilitation and work, and a lot of the work that I do with organizations is first helping them establish that message architecture of knowing who they are, who they're not, and who they'd like to be in the hearts and minds of their target audiences. And oftentimes they have not yet had those sort of internal discussions to say, well, do we want to be seen as more innovative or more relationship oriented or more creative? What's the difference between creative and innovative? But then they need to take a beat and say, well, what's the difference between creative and innovative for our audience? How do they see us? So I agree with you. I think that organizations have the responsibility of figuring out that vision, of knowing themselves best. It's kind of the Nathi Soten carved over the entrance of the temple in Delphi. Know thyself. Do that work first before you attempt to engage your audience.
Yeah,
And
I
that's hard
find
work.
it is. It is hard work. And then, but then, see, I'm gonna say, okay, great, you did the hard work, good. But now you have to implement that hard work, and you have to implement it in multiple places. I mean, we had a client come to us because they had done the hard work, and from a marketing and website point of view, it was there. It was
Mhm.
showing it that they had taken it through and communicated clearly based on that hard work. But then, the website was not all there was, right? Because their customers are, and this was largely B2B, but their customers were were interacting with them, not just the website, right? For instance, what about the app and the software that you use for the products and services that that company has? And that there was a huge disconnect. So, they had a brand that was, being supportive and flexible and caring about you and the way you do your business. But then when you actually were using the software, once you took them on, you joined the company and bought their products and services, that experience in just the day-to-day of using the software was not communicating, all those brand values, like, had gotten lost because it had gone outside the marketing and branding group and now was in development and engineering and the contractors that were programming the screens and pages and writing the error messages, right? I mean, there was like a whole nother world that, either weren't told what those brand values were, and or more likely aren't trained in what that means, right? If we have a brand that says that, you're flexible and supportive, and
Give an error
how
message example.
that they had.
Or it
Oh, yeah.
doesn't have to be a theoretical error message.
Theoretical error message that says, dates don't match, transaction denied. It's like, okay,
Now what?
and that's not a very friendly, supportive, flexible message. And
Right.
so there was this whole, we're not done. Right?
Yeah.
We're not done. And in fact, most customers were spending more time in the software end, than they were on the website end, which was doing all this wonderful communication.
But if that communication then isn't consistent across channels, that's where trust falls apart.
How do you get organizations to understand that and actually do something about it instead of just, nodding and saying, "Oh yeah, I can see how that might be important."
Yeah, so I think that's definitely like the initial question. How do you get an organization to care? From what I've seen consulting over the past 20 some years, no one cares until they start losing money. Or
Yeah.
they have a public relations like firestorm with which to
Nightmare
contend.
happens. Yeah.
When
Okay.
things blow up because content is inconsistent, because people were promised one thing, they had like one sort of warranty through one channel, and then they were promised something else elsewhere, and then they couldn't make good on it, and
Or
then they
when
bring it
market
to the media.
share starts declining, right?
Competitors are starting to look really
Competitors are
good.
moving into the
Yeah.
space.
So when they attract that kind of negative attention that ultimately undermines profits, or they see customer churn and oftentimes employee turnover because they're frustrated with the publishing environment, that's when organizations start to pay attention. So what I've found works best with my clients is to point out how inconsistency may cost them reputation and money and time.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think they might not make that connection.
Right. But consistency, on the other hand, saves them time, saves them budget. And if we look at it just through the lens of content and governance, and maybe we can expand that also to design governance through design systems, we can demonstrate how when we've already established the guardrails for designing a system, for designing an interface, when we've already established the rules governing what comprises a good error message, what elements it needs to include, or even on product description copy, what elements it needs to include, what part of speech they need to start with. Here are some pre-approved phrases that have already gotten the thumbs up from the legal department. When writers and designers work within that framework, when they work within established governance guidelines, an editorial style guide, and an existing design system, they save time. They can invest their creativity in solving new and more challenging problems. Things don't have to go back in front of the legal department time and time again. So they definitely save time and save budget across multiple departments. But I think the other thing that many organizations don't necessarily see, and this is always a good thing, I think, to bring before your HR team as well, is that when writers get their content approved more quickly, whether it's somebody that is casually wanting to contribute to the blog, or a copywriter that is working on new copy for the next season's product descriptions, when they get content approved more quickly, people are happier. I mean, when you get something back that is covered with red marks or that says, sorry, this is great, but it doesn't fit with our editorial calendar, or this is great, but it's totally the wrong style and tone for us, then you get kind of dejected. And when people experience that kind of critical feedback again and again, that's when they start feeling a greater sense of dissatisfaction. That's when they start looking elsewhere, and it results in increased employee turnover. It costs more money to recruit people than to retain good people. So again, consistency in content and design, implementing those sort of elements of governance, that saves budget there as well.
Yeah, I think the governance is so important and kind of tricky. But actually, I want to, Guthrie, I have another story. I don't know if I've ever told you, and I'm sure I haven't told Margot, because I'm thinking about what you said, Margot, is so true. I'm thinking of, when you said, until there's a disaster, right?
I don't believe there's a story I haven't heard.
Really? Okay, good. Then I'll tell the story, and you tell me if you've heard it.
Okay.
This was because I think some of the most interesting work, and certainly one thing that's made my phone ring the most over the years in terms of people calling to ask for help, is when there's a disaster. Then I have many of those disaster stories that people have called me. But this one guy called, just literally the phone rang, and I picked it up, and he said, I'm calling from and he named the company, and this was a large insurance company in the Northeast. He said, we have a situation here. And I'm like, okay, what is it? He said, well, my customer service department, they have all announced that until we fix the problems, they've unplugged their computers. And they won't answer the phones. So, like the whole customer service department was so fed up with the problems that were causing the customers to call in with problems, and the organization wouldn't fix the underlying, these communication problems and so on. He said they literally unplugged the computers and refused to take calls. He's like, can you help us? I was like, sure.
For the record, I've heard this story before.
Oh, darn it. Guthrie, have you heard all my stories?
Yeah. No, I didn't remember, but now that you said it.
Now that you said it, you've heard that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was new to me, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was one of the more dramatic ones. I think, but going back to what you said about governance, years ago, I used to do a lot of, I haven't as much recently, but I used to do a lot of work in organizations setting up user interface design standards, right? And that was a big thing for I won't say the years because that makes me sound so old. It was a big thing a while ago. Everyone wanted standards.
It's really fallen off.
It has fallen off. And one of the things about creating them is that, you have to decide on governance. Are these standards that everyone must follow, or are they guidelines, like recommendations. How do you teach everyone about what the standards and guidelines are? Because you do have new people coming in. How do you remind people? Are you reviewing everything and then enforcing it? What about change over time when you realize things have to change? What
How do
do
the
you have?
contractors know what the rules
How do the
are?
Right.
do you have a team who's responsible for keeping these things, alive? And it was like it was a thing for a while that to create them, which in itself was an interesting task because you would bring together, marketing and engineering and the developers and the business line owners to agree on what the standards would be. That was an interesting process. But even if you did that, what happened afterwards? And
Mm.
I think unless it is critical in terms of direct line to revenue or direct line to legal, right? I think people don't set up the governance and don't keep it going.
Well, and I think that the challenge around that is we don't always demonstrate people don't always see the immediate benefits of consistency and compliance with governance. Like we were just talking, like, how do you make the case for it? And I think that's certainly when you're looking to get executive support for a governance initiative, when you're looking to get executive support for greater consistency in content and design, we have those conversations around how you can save time and budget and all, and reduce turnover. But I think then people that are creating content, whether it is looking to the existing standards, maybe in a hardware company or in a product company, when they're looking to fit into existing hardware or existing products with new components, they have to play by the rules. But we need to always balance that with, well, how do you allow for innovation to expand those rules or to come up with new and better ways of doing things?
Yeah.
And I think we always need to demonstrate, I should say, the benefits have to be self-correcting and self-evident, that if I do things that stick with the standards, that stick with the editorial style guidelines, if I'm implementing things, kind of the existing widgets within the design system, going to get approval more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
This thing will just work. I'm going to be recognized for having a thing that just works more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the publishing culture around that and the design culture around that needs to have a way of saying, well, how do we review new things that maybe don't fit with our existing
Right.
standards?
Well, and do you find this, that people think that they have things that don't fit with the design standards, but then
I,
if you
I
sit down and talk to them, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, if I just tweak this one little thing, it actually does
right.
fit. Like they think they are the special snowflake that, can't possibly fit into the what you set up. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not true,
Yeah,
right?
and nothing new under the sun, and under the sun, all those snowflakes melt into water. Yeah, I worked with a client, several months ago where we were developing a new design system for them, and, I was helming the effort to create a content strategy system building into that design system. And they shared their existing process for how they vet new projects, who project teams need to sit down with to review sort of this new vision. If they were saying like, I'm creating this new thing, so I'm going to have to go off and maybe work with a different design firm, work with a different contractor. We're creating something that has never been done before, so this needs to be different. And all the hoops that people had to jump through to say, here's why we need to break the rules. Here's why we need new rules that apply only to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was challenging, but that projects that did warrant that very different kind of vision, the ones that met the marks for that, were it was appropriate for them to kind of go off and do their own thing. I know one of the organizations that I spoke with extensively when I was writing Trustworthy was the team behind TED.com. And they revealed some of like the challenges that they've faced there with maintaining trust in a system that is very consistent, in a publishing standard that is perceived to be very consistent. When you've got a talk that makes it onto TED, that makes it onto the homepage, people assume it has hit certain standards. But even with that, to maintain the trust of content creators and speakers and some of their harshest critics and their audience, to maintain their trust over time, they've had to expand those rules. They've had to expand some of the content types that they create to describe their content, because to describe the talks and videos that they share, because sometimes the rules and the needs around that content change. I sat down with the managing producer, I think was her title, for TED.com, and she shared how a few years ago, they had come under a lot of criticism. They had gotten kind of a lot of harsh feedback because there were a couple talks on the site that were getting a lot of attention. They were well produced, well edited, seemingly played by all the rules. And because of that, the actual content within them was falling under a lot of scrutiny. In one case, the talk, the science that was presented in it, had just become outdated, because that is the nature of science. We are continually learning and coming up with new ideas and revising our theories and whatnot based on those ideas. And they didn't have a way to talk about that, this is a great talk, but it's no longer accurate and relevant. They had another talk that had gotten a lot of attention because the speaker was terrific. He sounded great. The ideas that he was presenting were really, really exciting, and they were completely incorrect, completely spurious, and a lot of the other kind of big thinkers in his field, I believe he was an astronomer, were pointing fingers and saying, "This is a problem with TED. They're here elevating, ideas worth sharing, ideas worth spreading, but some of those ideas are wrong. Just because they're a publisher doesn't mean that we should trust them." And TED didn't have a way to respond to that. So, looking at their existing publishing guidelines, governance guidelines, their existing rules around content didn't give them any answers. So they had to, again, kind of think more broadly than their existing rules and guidelines. And they ended up convening a panel of their harshest critics to say, okay, we hear you that this content is either irrelevant or just wildly inaccurate. Do you think we should remove it from the site? Should we kill kind of all of those incoming links and all in the process? Um, should we add disclaimers all around? What do you think we should do? And by gathering their audience, again, these were some of their harshest critics, to say, we don't have a way in our existing system to respond to this need. What do you think? They kind of engaged in this effort of co-design that ended up bringing more trust into the organization. It changed a lot of their harshest critics into some of their most ardent champions, because then they were able to contribute to a solution that allowed the organization to survive. It allowed the publishing platform to survive. TED ended up developing additional content types to add disclaimers on content to point people to more accurate content or more updated videos, to say, if you're interested in this topic, look here as well. So that was a case where they looked at their existing governance model and said, our rules don't fully support all of our needs at this time. Let's go out. Let's talk with our critics. Let's come up with another solution and not throw out our governance model, but now let's add to it. And in the process, I think they gained a lot of trust. They certainly brought a lot of their harshest critics closer to them. But it allowed them to kind of live in that model that so many organizations that do this right, that they follow as well, that if you have governance guidelines in place, you also need to have a way to continually improve them. And maybe that's every quarter or every 6 months you sit down and say, well, what are the new content types that people have needed that maybe they're completely arcane and we'll never use them again, or maybe we need to bring them back into the fold now and continue to update our guidelines. And I think that approach of saying guidelines are not hard and fast, they are evolving because our organization is continuously evolving, that's a healthy model to follow as well.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I would hate to, I mean, what a tough position to be in. But it also, points out so many things too, like just, I mean, I think of that almost as kind of on the extreme end, right?
Yeah.
Of history problems and content problems that an organization would have. But it's great because it's like, look, if they could solve, right, there's lessons, right? Analogous situations that, okay, maybe we don't have that big a problem. But you know what? We got old stuff, at
Mm.
our site too. And this mighty road trust, and what are we going to do about it? Right. So I think that's uh, such a good story and a good way for people to realize that, there are these, I guess, content and timeline history problems, right? And governance problems.
Mm.
And they might seem difficult and, maybe even impossible to solve, but they're not necessarily, right? With some creativity and with learning from what others have done, some of this might be applicable even in your organization. I think
Yeah.
that's great. What an interesting story. And it made me think of so many things. Like, for instance, just this idea that um, it's one thing I've started doing when I'm working with clients now is from the beginning of the engagement, talking about not just governance, but, like, we can do this work now, but then we have to build into it how we change over time. Like that,
Right.
the continuous discovery, the continuous metrics, the continuous research. Like, let's not even start unless that continuity is part of it, because otherwise it's not going to be worthwhile to do all this work. So we're going to build this in from the start, from the very beginning. We know in our plan that we're going to be talking about and what happens when there is an initial launch, right? What happens then? And we're going to have a plan for that afterwards. And I think that's another strategy that, you know, and I'd always rather build it in at the beginning,
Mm.
right? Otherwise, you get to the end and everyone's excited and they say they're done and they can't go back and get any budget either. So, build it into the beginning, right? That there's continuous. And I think, luckily, the trends these days, the whole continuous learning, continuous discovery, that seems to be a trend. So um, I've tried to jump on that and build it in to the work that we do.
Well, and I think that it's probably another area where our industry can learn a lot from looking at more traditional engineering and innovation industries. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, when we see, like, the shuttle launch, all of those types of images that are kind of seared into the collective unconscious of what it looks like to see that kind of big event at Cape Canaveral. I think we go back to that, though, and can see that there's a team that focuses on the launch, and then there's a team that focuses on what happens after the launch. How do we continue to ensure that work is still
Mhm.
important, and successful? And I don't know that in our industry, we always remember that launch is just day one. What happens after that? There was a conference that I was involved in for a couple of years, uh, run by Blend Interactive in Sioux Falls, called Now What, that basically focused on that problem of and all the challenges around day two and beyond. And there is such an enormous audience for those kinds of challenges, because we can see how in so many websites, maybe they launch with great ideas for a blog or for video interviews. They launched with one or two, and then you see digital tumbleweeds kind of blowing through the blog after 6 months because There was no there. Nobody had that plan for what happens next and what happens on an ongoing basis. And I think I agree with you. I think building into our projects this sense of we're not just aiming for launch, but we're aiming for a successful ongoing mission. That's another way that we build a sense of consistency and continuity with our audiences, that it empowers them because they know what to expect, whether it's to get a newsletter every week on a Tuesday because that's your publishing cycle, that's what you're committing to, and you've got an editorial calendar hopefully to support that, or that you've shared your roadmap with them so that they know when there's going to be a new product coming, what to expect, what to anticipate. That's how you build interest and loyalty and ultimately trust, by empowering your audiences with that sense of continuity. And if that's ultimately the end goal of business, to empower our audiences, earn their trust so that they're coming back to us with their needs, whatever industry, whatever business you're in, I think that's what we need to focus on. How do we maintain that kind of consistent, ongoing relationship, not just peak with launch and then
And
abandon,
then that's it.
grew up
Yeah.
in space?
Now, Guthrie, Margot, and I have obviously just had a lot to say, and you've been quiet for a while. Do you would jump in if you, or maybe we're just too talkative, and you feel like you can't jump in.
Do you guys know more about this than I do?
Well, I don't know. You know a lot about, actually, Guthrie, a lot about the research, from a behavioral science point of view about trust. So
Sure. But this is
a little different.
that's far afield. You guys are doing great.
All right. Margot, tell me, because I'm also paying attention to the time here. Tell me about I mentioned at the beginning about your book, and I see it there behind you. She's got it such a great position. It's like right there, right, trustworthy, right? So tell me, of course we can say that everyone should buy it, but who is it really written for? Who do you think is the right audience for that?
No, I think you had it right. Everyone should buy it. And if you open it up and you're like, "This is not for me." Has to belong to a friend. Well, I would say that I guess this is one of those things, going back to your original question, where businesses may have in mind kind of who they are, but they don't necessarily test it and see, who does their audience think they
Yeah.
are? Are they really hitting it with their audience? My initial audience, I was envisioning designers, UX designers, product managers, copywriters, content strategists, content designers, UX writers, marketers, marketing managers, social media managers, maybe all the way up to the CMO, the chief creative officer, chief content officer, creative directors. That was the audience to whom I was writing, and as I was kind of gathering examples and developing the framework that I present in Trustworthy, a lot of what I focus on addresses issues of marketing and content and design.
Do you want
In
to
the
just give
time
a
that
quick blurb?
What's that?
You want to just give a quick blurb about the book in case someone has no idea what it's about at all? What's the
Sure, yeah. So
10-second
Trustworthy
summary?
looks at the problem that we have where cynicism undermines so many of our marketing messages. Sales cycles are taking longer. A lot of marketing content falls flat. People just don't trust brands, trust products, trust media entities the way they used to, with good reason in many cases. And we can say, maybe sales cycles are taking longer because of the pandemic or something. But this goes a few years before that as well. We've seen kind of problems in many organizations. And it's because with this kind of growing consumer cynicism and problems around trust, people have a sense that they don't know where to look for reliable information. And if you're in marketing, so much of what you do is saying, here's what you should know about a product that's coming. Here's why this is the right product for you, or here's why our services will benefit you. You can look around, but this is going to be right for you. And people are kind of pushing back on that. So I wanted to see, in cases where people don't push back on that, but where they lean in and they say, tell me more. I'm learning from this content. I'm learning from this experience. Yeah, this is where I'm going to turn to for the next pair of jeans that I buy, or for my cell phone service plan, or this is going to be where I get information about public health and keeping my family safe, or when I'm engaging with government crime statistics and bringing those back into my media organization. This is where I'm going to turn for that information. I wanted to see in all of those cases where people trust brands, what are those organizations doing right? Whether they're in consumer packaged goods, in retail, in healthcare, in insurance, in government, what are they doing right? And in looking at them, I realized there's an internal framework in how they present information visually and verbally for how they build trust. And it starts by empowering their audiences through a consistent voice, again, visually and verbally, and that touches on the consistency that we've been talking about, the right volume of information, so they're presenting the right level of detail for their audience, again, in verbal text or in the amount of detail in an image or in a diagram. So it's the right voice, the right volume, and they're presenting that information with a degree of vulnerability. Not a lot of bravado. Instead, they're saying, here's our process, here's what we know, here's what we don't yet know, let us bring you into that. That's what TED did. One of the other examples I share, that's what Zoom has been doing really, really well over the past 2 years too. So we unpack that. So that's what I focus on in Trustworthy. And
Kind
I
of
ended up
reverse
writing that.
engineering.
What's that?
Kind of reverse engineering.
Yeah. And I think that that's helpful guidance and some good lessons for anyone in design, anybody that runs a design team, anyone in content or marketing. But I've also been hearing from a lot of people in HR, in different areas of retail, in healthcare. Increasingly over the past 2 years, I've had a lot more conversations with public health officials around their communication as well. So I think really any organization that is in a position of empowering its audience and needs to, that's who Trustworthy is for.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, Margot, when you write a book, because I've written some books too. And, I think, well, the book publisher insists that you define the audience, right? And I think that's really useful. And I know when I've written my books, I would have like a developmental editor who was constantly, well, wait a minute, remember who you're writing for, you got to revise this section, right? But then when it's out there, you kind of, it's kind of interesting to see who really is reading it and who's really talking about it. And sometimes there are surprises there, and it's not exactly who you thought was going to be interested in it, which I think is fun. I never had a problem with that, but it's kind of interesting how that works. Margot, it's been so fun having you on the podcast as our first guest on our live stream. And if people want to get hold of you, what is the best way to do that?
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed this. People can reach me usually on Twitter. I'm at mbloomstein, or you can find me through appropriateinc.com. Yeah, I look forward to hearing whatever thoughts people have on the subject. Like we were saying, this is everybody's responsibility, and so let's get to it.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Guthrie, you
Thank
got
you so
anything to
much.
close us out?
I should have like a really snappy kind of sum it
Snappy.
all up,
Yeah, come
it's just
on.
like oh, yeah, we have a thank you from someone who was
All right.
watching.
Good. Someone who's listening in.
No, I will just say, if anyone wants to get a hold of us, the Team W, it's info@theteamw.com. Again, we think this stuff is important. I really think, we talked a couple episodes ago, a little bit about trust with especially in, I guess I would say, sort of a modern internet context. You have the Kickstarters of the world. It's a lot easier for companies to pull the rug out on stuff, and because they're sort of in a distant place far away, as opposed to maybe your neighborhood hardware store where you are interacting with physical things face to face. Just a lot of people have been burned a lot, and it's almost sort of the norm in some online cultures like cryptocurrency. That's like a very common thing. A lot of startups, the whole purpose is to see if you make it big, and if you don't, okay, we're just going to shut everything down. And people are just kind of standing around being like, I thought there was a product here, and now the product just doesn't exist, and the services get, Google changing their chat app about every 18 months. So just when you sort of buy into an ecosystem, even within one company, they're like, okay, we're changing the whole thing, and now you got to log into all different. So I think it, maybe it's always been this way. Maybe people are getting more cynical because of that. But certainly these are really fantastic topics. We probably could have just kept going for another 10 hours. So I shouldn't have brought up more things.
Yeah, now you're bringing up more. No, this was your succinct summary.
Succinct summary. No. So again, I just want to thank everyone for being on. I think this was a fantastic discussion. We should have sometimes we have like the really technical UX stuff, and sometimes it's good to go more bigger picture, broad strategy. And so I think this was a really great balance. So thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Margot.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Bye.
Have a great rest of your day.